Wow, you've really given us a fascinating collection of texts here for this deep dive. Excerpts from the Bible, Greek, literal, readers, and standard Berean versions, plus the Satanic Bible, and even a little bit from the Book of Mormon.
It's really a diverse selection.
Yeah, it really is. So today, we're going to try and see what common ground we can find between all of these texts and where these really influential works kind of clash. What do you think? Where should we start?
Well, it's really interesting to me how even just within the different versions of the Bible that we have here, you can see all these subtle shifts in emphasis and interpretation.
Yeah, and it just goes to show how these texts are not static, right? They're constantly evolving through translation and reinterpretation. Okay, so I think maybe the best place to start is with that big question, right? The granddaddy of them all. How did these texts depict the very beginning, the origins of the universe, humanity, all that?
Right.
The Reader's Bible in the book of Genesis gives us that classic 7-day creation story. Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and the flood, the whole thing. I mean, it's a narrative that's so deeply woven into Western culture, don't you think?
Absolutely.
But even within just these Christian texts that we have, like the standard Berean Bible, for instance, while it tells the same basic story, it uses some slightly different wording and framing.
Yeah, and those subtle differences can really give you a unique perspective on the same event.
Oh, absolutely. For example, just the way a version describes God's actions on each day of creation,
Right.
It can suggest different levels of like divine involvement.
Or even, the passage of time.
It's almost like different artists painting the same scene, but each with their own like style.
Right, exactly.
But then, we bring in the Satanic Bible, and things get really interesting because there is no divine creator in the traditional sense.
Yeah, it's a very sharp divergence from the Abrahamic traditions. The focus is really shifted to individual power and self-determination. It almost feels like a rejection of any kind of preordained existence.
Yeah, so we've got some vastly different creation stories there. But how about rules for living? What kind of moral codes do these texts propose? I'm looking at the Reader's Bible, particularly Leviticus. It lays out this highly specific set of laws and rituals for the Israelites, covering everything from what they can eat to how they should conduct themselves in society.
Yeah, it's fascinating to read Leviticus because you really get this window into the daily life and religious practices of the ancient Israelites. It's not just like abstract moral principles.
Yeah.
It really gets down into the nitty-gritty of daily life. It even
Yeah.
gets into things like specific rules about sacrifices and hygiene practices.
Yeah.
It just shows how deeply intertwined religion was with every aspect of their existence.
Absolutely, and some of these laws are pretty intense, like the prohibitions against eating certain animals.
Right.
I mean, no bacon. Come on.
Right. Well, and those dietary restrictions might seem pretty arbitrary to us today, but they would have served a purpose back then.
Oh, absolutely.
They helped to create this distinct cultural identity for the Israelites and set them apart from all their neighbors.
Right.
So it's a reminder that, what we eat isn't just about sustenance. It can be this really powerful symbol of belonging and cultural identity.
That's a great point. But when we compare Leviticus to the Ten Commandments in the standard Berean Bible, which are found in Exodus and Deuteronomy, we do see some overlap there.
Right.
Like honoring your parents, not stealing, not murdering, these seem to be pretty universal across different cultures and different belief systems.
Absolutely. I think those shared commandments really point to a sort of fundamental human understanding of how societies need to function, to have harmony.
Right.
It's a recognition that certain moral principles are just essential for peaceful coexistence.
Makes sense.
And they form the bedrock of any kind of stable and just society.
And then the Satanic Bible comes in and, flips the script. No surprise there. Rejects traditional morality outright and champions individual desires and self-interest above all else. It even has this really interesting concept of psychic vampires. These people who drain you of your energy.
Right.
It really makes you rethink your social circle, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. The idea of psychic vampires is really unique to the Satanic Bible.
Right.
And it's less about like literal blood sucking and more about being able to identify the people in your life that are draining you emotionally and mentally.
Yeah.
And it encourages you to be mindful of your relationships and recognize those people who might be taking more than they give.
So we've talked about beginnings and we've talked about rules for life. But how about figures who guide us, whether spiritually or otherwise? The Reader's Bible is full of stories about prophets and leaders. We have Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, prophets like Samuel and Elijah challenging kings and relaying messages from God. Talk about epic storytelling, parting the Red Sea, Elijah calling down fire from heaven. These are stories that really grab your attention. What do you think?
Well, I think they speak to that very, very human desire for guidance,
Yeah.
and meaning. And these figures embody that search for connection with something greater than ourselves, a yearning for purpose and understanding in a world that can often feel very chaotic.
And then, of course, we have Jesus in the New Testament. Greek, literal, and standard Berean versions all portray his teachings, miracles, and sacrifice.
It's hard to overstate the influence that Jesus has had on history and culture.
Oh, it absolutely.
His teachings on love and forgiveness and compassion have resonated for centuries and have really shaped the moral and ethical landscape of much of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, even those who don't follow his teachings still recognize the impact that he's had on Western civilization.
Right, absolutely. But then you look at the Satanic Bible, and it has a completely different take on leadership and power. Right? It's all about personal power, becoming a magus who can bend situations to their will. Right. That's a far cry from the divinely appointed prophets that we see in the Bible.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because the concept of the magus in the Satanic Bible isn't really about having supernatural powers or anything like that. It's more about self-reliance and mastering your own destiny. It's really a rejection of blind faith and an emphasis on self-development through knowledge and willpower. So it's a very individualistic and proactive approach.
Yeah, I can see that.
Very different.
So it's really fascinating to see how even with such different approaches to authority, both the Bible and the Satanic Bible seem to acknowledge the allure and the potential danger of power. One emphasizes submitting to a higher power,
Right.
while the other advocates for harnessing your own power. It's like this constant human struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
And it also makes me think about how both of these texts grapple with the idea of temptation. Even though they approach it from kind of opposite angles, the Bible presents temptation as something to resist, often linked to a figure like Satan, right? But the Satanic Bible seems to suggest that you should embrace certain temptations, viewing them as like natural human desires.
Yeah, that's a really interesting difference, and it highlights a really fundamental philosophical clash
Oh, yeah.
about how we should approach desire. Should we suppress our desires to achieve spiritual purity, or do we embrace them as part of what makes us human? The Bible often frames desire as a source of sin, while the Satanic Bible views it as a driving force for personal growth and fulfillment.
It's like one path is about denying the self and the other is about embracing it.
Right.
Even the messy parts. So we've got these kind of overarching themes.
Right.
But are there any specific stories or passages that come to mind that are particularly illuminating?
Well, one that always stands out to me is the story of Job from the Reader's Bible. It's a tale of suffering and faith and trying to grasp God's will. Job, he's this righteous man, loses everything. Wealth, family, health, you name it.
It's rough.
It is.
Yeah.
But he remains devout, even questioning God directly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that resonates with anyone who's experienced hardship and loss.
Yeah.
I mean, and questioned why bad things happen.
Yeah.
Job's pain just feels so real, so relatable, even though it's wrapped up in this ancient epic narrative.
And it's a story that appears in many different forms throughout history and across cultures. It's this universal human experience of suffering. And the book of Job acknowledges that there aren't easy answers.
Right.
That even the most faithful individuals can experience profound pain and loss.
And it also reminds us that religious texts aren't just about dogma and rules, right?
Yeah.
They can offer these profound reflections on the human condition.
Right.
These stories that explore doubt, loss, and searching for meaning.
Absolutely. And they invite us to grapple with difficult questions. Even the Book of Mormon excerpt that we have here, while it's not really focused on heaven or hell like the New Testament, it emphasizes remembering the Savior during the sacrament, right? It's a different way of connecting with the divine. It's more about personal reflection and remembrance than about a specific afterlife destination.
Right. It really highlights how even within Christianity, there are these varied interpretations of what it means to connect with the divine. And, well, I can only assume that the Satanic Bible takes a totally different route when it comes to the afterlife.
Yeah, it really does. The Satanic Bible is much more focused on earthly fulfillment than on any specific afterlife. And it prioritizes achieving your desires through, well, they call it group energy and personal will.
Huh. That's interesting, this concept of group energy.
Yeah.
It suggests that collective action and shared purpose can enhance individual potential.
Yeah.
I mean, that idea resonates even outside of a purely religious context, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Think about, social movements, teamwork, even artistic collaborations. I mean, there is a certain power in shared energy and purpose.
That's a great point. And it just shows how these religious texts can spark insights into human behavior and motivation that go way beyond just the realm of belief.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can find when you really start to dig deep into this stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, and I think there are some really interesting things to unpack when we start to look at power dynamics. It seems like these texts have very different ideas about where power comes from and how it should be used. We've discussed the prophets in the Bible,
Right.
who are divinely appointed leaders, but the Satanic Bible pushes this idea of personal power and self-determination.
It's a huge contrast that really reflects the core philosophies of these texts.
Right.
The Bible often presents this hierarchical power structure with God at the top, followed by prophets and kings and so on.
Right.
And the Satanic Bible promotes individual agency and the ability to shape your own destiny.
Makes sense.
It's a much flatter power structure. Right?
Yeah.
It completely rejects the need for intermediaries between an individual and their goals.
And it's interesting because even within the Bible, there are stories that challenge this idea of blind obedience to authority.
Oh, absolutely.
We see Moses defying Pharaoh to free the Israelites,
Right.
and prophets calling out corrupt kings. There's this thread of individual conscience
Yeah.
and this courage to speak truth to power, even when it goes against the established order.
And I think those stories are really crucial because they demonstrate that even within a text that emphasizes divine authority,
Yeah.
there's still room for questioning, dissent, and individual moral judgment.
Right.
Blind faith isn't always the answer.
Yeah, it seems like the Bible presents this dynamic tension between obedience and individual conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always straightforward, which is what makes it so compelling, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a collection of stories, laws, poems, prophecies that have been debated and interpreted for centuries.
And that complexity is precisely why it continues to fascinate and challenge readers,
Right.
It doesn't offer easy answers. It prompts us to grapple with difficult questions about morality and justice and the nature of faith itself.
All right, so last but not least, let's talk about how these texts depict humanity's relationship with the divine. In the Bible, we're made in God's image, but also flawed and in need of redemption. What do you think?
Well, that concept of being made in God's image is absolutely central to the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Right.
And it really elevates humanity's position within creation, but also acknowledges our capacity for both good and evil.
Right.
So it's this balancing act,
Yeah.
between our potential for greatness and our tendency towards fallibility.
And how does the Satanic Bible approach this concept of the divine? Does it even acknowledge a divine realm?
It doesn't really focus on a traditional concept of God. Instead, it elevates the individual as the center of their own universe.
Okay.
It's a very humanistic approach that prioritizes self-empowerment and personal responsibility. So it shifts the focus from external deities to the potential within each individual.
It's incredible how these texts present such different ways of understanding our place in the cosmos.
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to think about the sheer range of beliefs and interpretations that exist.
It really showcases the diversity of human thought and experience, doesn't it?
Yeah?
And exploring these religious texts allows us to step outside of our own limited perspectives and
Right.
consider this much broader spectrum of possibilities.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the details of the differences between these texts. But what strikes me most is that they all speak to this fundamental human need for meaning, purpose, and connection.
Yeah.
Whether it's through faith in a higher power, pursuing knowledge, or developing personal power, we seem driven to find something that transcends our individual existence.
That's a really powerful insight. And it speaks to the enduring relevance of these texts.
Yeah.
Even for those who may not subscribe to any of their specific doctrines. I mean, they grapple with questions that are core to the human experience.
Yeah.
Why are we here? What is our purpose? What is the nature of good and evil? These are questions that continue to resonate with us today.
And even though we've been discussing these texts for a while now, I feel like we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to explore, so many layers of meaning to uncover.
Well, that's the beauty of engaging with these texts, isn't it? They're inexhaustible sources of wisdom, insight, and inspiration. And they invite us to think critically, question our assumptions, and participate in a dialogue that has spanned centuries.
It's been an incredible journey so far, and I can't wait to see where our deep dive takes us next.
Me too. It's fascinating how those texts wrestle with the concept of free will. The Bible presents a world where God has a plan, but humans also have a choice to follow it or not. That tension between divine will and human agency, I mean, it's a recurring theme, wouldn't you say?
It's like this cosmic dance.
Right.
We've got the freedom to make our own choices, but those choices have consequences.
Right.
In this life, and maybe even in the afterlife, at least according to these texts.
Exactly. And even the Satanic Bible, which is so focused on self-determination, still emphasizes that element of choice. It rejects any kind of predetermined fate and really encourages individuals to seize control of their lives, make their own decisions, even if those decisions, defy societal norms.
So they both seem to acknowledge the weight of individual choice and the responsibility that comes with it, even though they come at it from totally different angles.
Absolutely. It suggests that maybe that capacity for choice is one of the most fundamental aspects of being human, regardless of what you believe about the universe or a higher power.
It makes me think about how we even define good and evil.
Right.
The Bible lays out a pretty clear-cut view. God is good, Satan is evil, and humanity is caught in the middle. But the Satanic Bible just turns it on its head.
It does.
It questions those traditional ideas of morality. What do you think about that?
Well, the Satanic Bible essentially posits that good and evil aren't absolute truth,
Okay.
but rather subjective concepts. It encourages individuals to create their own moral compass, one that aligns with their personal needs and desires.
That's definitely a more radical perspective than a lot of the traditional religious views we've been looking at.
It is.
It really makes you examine your own values and
Yeah.
what you consider to be right and wrong.
It does. And it reminds us that what's considered morally acceptable has shifted throughout history and varies across cultures.
Oh, absolutely.
What might be considered evil in one context could be seen as acceptable or even virtuous in another.
This whole deep dive has just been like opening a window into this sheer diversity of religious thought.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these texts, written across centuries and cultures, can still speak to us today, raising these timeless questions about the human experience.
It really is a testament to their enduring power.
Yeah.
They delve into the questions that have captivated humanity from the very beginning.
Right.
What's the meaning of life? What happens after we die? Is there a higher power? What is good and what is evil?
And even after all this discussion, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack, so many layers of meaning to uncover.
That's the beauty of engaging with these texts, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're not meant to be read once and put aside. They're invitations to ongoing exploration, critical thinking, and a dialogue that stretches across generations.
So, after diving deep into all these religious texts, what's the biggest takeaway that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think the key takeaway is that engaging with religious ideas should be an ongoing conversation, not a quest for definitive answers.
Okay.
These texts offer us a glimpse into this vast and intricate tapestry of human belief and the diverse ways that we try to make sense of the world and our place in it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I'd add that even if someone doesn't consider themselves religious, exploring these texts can still be incredibly enriching.
Oh, for sure.
They can challenge your assumptions, broaden your understanding of different cultures and belief systems, and even offer some unexpected insights into your own values and worldview.
Absolutely. I mean, these texts are part of our shared human heritage. They offer a window into the evolution of thought, morality, and our ongoing search for meaning and purpose.
Well, this has been an incredible journey into the heart of religious belief. We've explored creation narratives, moral codes, prophets and leaders, the afterlife, the nature of good and evil, and so much more. It's been like a whirlwind tour of some of the most influential and thought-provoking writings in human history.
It has.
And while our deep dive might be ending here, I hope it sparks a continued exploration for our listeners.
Me too.
These texts invite us to keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep engaging with the ideas they present.
Absolutely.
There's a lifetime of reflection and discovery waiting within their pages.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up, we'll leave you with this final thought. What parts of these texts resonated most with you? What questions do they raise for you personally? And how do they shape your own understanding of the world and your place within it?
It's really interesting to think about how these texts approach, like the idea of salvation or achieving a positive outcome. I mean, what happens after we die?
Yeah. It's the ultimate question, isn't it?
It is. The New Testament, across all the different versions that we have, Greek, literal, standard, Berean, offers this concept of heaven and hell,
Right.
salvation through faith in Jesus, and the resurrection. It's really a foundational part of Christian belief.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these ideas have shaped Western culture and thought for centuries.
Right.
But then we look at something like the Book of Mormon excerpt, and while it doesn't directly talk about heaven or hell, it does emphasize remembering the Savior during the sacrament.
Right.
It suggests a different way of connecting with the divine, one that's more focused on personal reflection and remembrance.
It's more about the journey than the destination, so to speak.
Yeah, and then of course we have the Satanic Bible, which, well, I doubt it has much to say about heaven and hell.
It doesn't. The Satanic Bible is much more focused on earthly fulfillment
Right.
rather than any kind of specific afterlife. And it really emphasizes achieving your desires through, as they call it, group energy.
That's a recurring theme, isn't it? This idea of collective power and shared purpose.
It is. It seems to be a key element of their philosophy.
It really makes you think about the power of community and collaboration.
It does. And it challenges us to consider how we can harness that energy to achieve both individual and collective goals.
Well, this has been an absolutely incredible journey, wouldn't you say?
I would, yeah.
Exploring these different religious texts, trying to find common ground, seeing where they diverge. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
It has. And I think it highlights the incredible diversity of human thought and belief.
Absolutely. So, to wrap things up, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I'd say the most important takeaway is this. Engaging with religious ideas should be an ongoing process of exploration and reflection, not a search for easy answers.
I like that.
These texts offer us a glimpse into the vast and complex tapestry of human belief and the many different ways we try to make sense of the world around us. But they also challenge us to question our own assumptions, to grapple with difficult questions, and to engage in meaningful dialogue with those who hold different beliefs.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And even if you don't consider yourself a religious person, I think there's still so much to be gained from exploring these texts.
Right.
They offer a window into history, culture, philosophy, and the human search for meaning and purpose. And at the end of the day, isn't that something we can all relate to?
Absolutely. We're all on this journey together trying to figure things out.
Exactly. So as we conclude this deep dive into the world of religious texts, we want to leave you with one final thought. What resonated with you most from our discussion? What questions are you still pondering? And how has this exploration shaped your own understanding of the world and your place in it? Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.
It's been a pleasure.